All right, so up until this point, we've talked about chord structures, again, tonic, subdominant, dominant, fill-in chords, and let's say you've created this really great melody, but you need an opportunity to breathe, to change melodies, maybe go into a different melody altogether or a variation of that melody, but ultimately you're going to need to finish off that phrase or that musical thought. And so what comes into play are cadences. And you'll have cadences throughout music. The easiest places to identify cadences is if you go through your old church hymnals. They are a great place to identify solid cadences where you end in either a deceptive, half cadence, plagal, or your standard full cadence. We're done with this thought, we're moving on. So I want to give you an idea of each of these cadences that are most popular in tonal music, and so that you can also hear it on the piano to hear what it will sound like. So the first one I want to do is my favorite, which is a deceptive cadence. Now this is not a finish my thought cadence. This is a I'm gonna cadence, but gotcha, I'm continuing on with my musical thought. So I'm gonna play it. The structure is 1, 6, 5, 6. So tonic, dominant, where you think you'd want to resolve back to tonic, but we're not. Tonic, dominant, and then we're going to move to 6. So let's hear what that sounds like. So 1, 5. Now we want to hear 1, but that's not what we're going to do. It's deceptive because our ears are expecting one thing, but we're going to do something entirely different. And if you recall back several videos before, when we were demonstrating, or when I was demonstrating the 5-1 relationship, that dominant, how it establishes our tonic, our key, I did something different, which was kind of cool, I mentioned, but it wasn't really a resolution. That was actually a deceptive cadence. So let's hear the deceptive cadence now, without further ado. 1, 5, 6. Sounds great, and it allows us to continue on with our musical thought with actually fully resolving the idea or the phrase. So let's hear that again. I like it a lot. And like I mentioned before, it's one of my favorites because of the color, and again there's the word color, and the flavor, again the word flavor, that I enjoy so much in music. The second cadence is a half cadence. Now, I'm going to recall back a musical piece, just a little idea that I was playing with earlier in these videos, to demonstrate a half cadence, because a half cadence is just simply 1, and then we move to 5. It ends on 5. But I will tell you that in a half cadence, you're going to usually use a substitute chord either to get to your dominant, or you're going to use that substitute chord as your half cadence. Now if you recall, substitute chords, we had 1, which is our tonic, but then we used 2, and we also had the option of 7 diminished. And with a half cadence, it's easier to move from your tonic or whatever chord you're in this musical piece to one of the substitutes and then end on the dominant. And you're going to hear that it's not a resolution, but it allows us to land safely on 5 on the dominant without being left like, what? So let me play the 2 chords first, just 1 to 5, and then I'm going to go ahead and recall back that theme. And you're going to hear that theme, and then I'm going to identify on your screen when we actually get to the substitute chord and the dominant chord where we land on the half cadence. So here we go. So 1, 5, and that's where we land. Now we can use substitute, and that sounds much better because now we're more satisfied with landing on the 5. Let me play that again. And that's a half cadence. So let me show you that in that musical piece that we played earlier of how we can land on a half cadence. All right, so the half cadence really says, hey, we've got more to say. We're not really ending this musical thought. We're going to continue on. And it lets us stay there happily. Our ears are satisfied because we're okay with that. Our ears hear that and say, okay, I'm good as long as we keep going. This is not an end, but I know there's more to come. The next cadence that I'm going to play is called a plagal cadence or an amen cadence. And if you're familiar, again, with old hymns from old church music, you're going to hear the plagal cadence quite regularly, and it's going to sound like amen. Now there's a couple things going on in there, typically with voice leading, which has suspensions that really allow for that to happen. But I'm going to try to represent that on the piano with 1-4-1, okay? And you can kind of hear that amen if it's done really with some great voice leading. So, amen. All right? 1-4-1 is not used very often, but the 4 can be, in some cases, used as sort of that dominant chord in this type of cadence. And usually that's used at the very end of a piece. You're not going to hear that type of cadence in the middle of a piece. It just doesn't make sense. But at the end, when you're talking about hymns anyway, and you're talking about voice writing, it's certainly appropriate at the end of the piece to use a 1-4-1 plagal cadence. Now, we're going to get to the really standard cadence. We're done with our musical thought. We're moving on to something else. And this is, again, your tonic, dominant, back to tonic. So 1, 5, 1, okay? And typically the 1-5-1 has a couple things happening in the melody. And so let me play those here for you. We're going to play usually 7, back to 1, or you're going to hear 3, 2, 1 in the melody. The other thing that's happening in this really standard cadence is that you're going to have root positions. And what I mean by that is you're going to have solidly 1 in its root form, and we're going to learn about the different inversions later in the next video. And then you're going to hear solidly 5 in the left hand, in the bass in particular, which is the root position of the 5 chord, back to 1 in the root position. Now, 1 can be in, say, an inverted position, but once we get to that 5, now we are definitely root back to root. Okay, and that'll make more sense when we actually look at how chords are inverted and how they're notated as well. Okay, so just a reminder, we had several different cadences. We had our deceptive cadence, which was 1, 5, 6, beautiful. We had our half cadence, which we found was really useful if we used a substitute dominant, so either our 2 or our 7, before landing securely on the dominant, which is 5. So 1, 2, 5, okay, as an example. We could also do 1, 7, 5. You want to hear that? We'll hear how that sounds. 1. Not as smooth. I prefer, honestly, the 2. It makes an easier transition. So once again, 1, 2, 5. The other cadence that we learned was the plagal, which was amen. And there's some suspensions going on, but it's 1-4-1. So you've got 1, amen. And again, that's used at the end of a piece. Typically when you're looking at liturgical music, which is church music. And then you have finally your dominant cadence, which is your 1, 5, 1. And we know we're done when we hear that cadence. I hope you've enjoyed. Next, we're going to talk about inversions.